Good day everyone, GarageKing here, and on today's episode we are going to do the rear brakes on the MDX, so I'm just spraying them down right now to get rid of any excess brake dust. We're going to lift the vehicles, but this isn't my normal standard brake job. On this vehicle I'm going to be painting the calipers, so it's going to be fun. Stay tuned. Alright, let's take a quick look at these brakes and see what we see. Alright, so here's a close-up of the brakes. Now we can tell with this style of brakes, if anyone follows my teachings or my channel, there is nothing fancy about this caliper. There is just one hose, it's all hydraulic, so that means we have to have our rear brakes inside. So our rear brakes are going to be inside, so once we take this apart we're going to see two brake shoes, and you can actually see they ride right on the inside of the brake rotor right there. Okay, so to get this off, panning around, we can see we have two 12mm bolts. There's one right there, and there's one right there. Those are the outer caliper bolts. And then if we look on the inside, right in there, there you go. You can see we have two 17mm bolts. So once we take off the caliper right here, then we're going to take off the two 17mm bolts right there. Now we're going to do the bracket. You can see the pads are almost shut. There's nothing left. Now I should say, if you're replacing just the pads and you're not going to touch the rotor, this is as far as you have to go, because obviously right now you can slide the pads out, you can change them, and then you can lubricate the sliders. Ooh, those are tight. And you can see when we take the bolts out, there's actually no anti-seize on the bolts. They're just in there tight. So now we can just take the bracket off. There we go, and we'll take this to the bench. Okay, so I have everything out on the bench. There's the pads I'm using. They're Akebono pads. Very high quality, very low dust, and they have a really good fit. I'll put a link in the description for everybody. So what we should do before we take it apart is let's take apart our actual brake pads. If I can get them apart here. Let's see, just gonna pull this apart. So there's our brake pads. Now what we should do, just so we don't mix up anything, because sometimes left and right's different. Okay, so let's get a better look here. You can see on the factory shims there's a hole in the top and not in the bottom. So we know on this side of the car, which is the passenger that we're doing right now, passenger side of the car, what we're going to do is get our two brake pads ready. So we got them right there. In terms of the shims, we know that the one with the hole goes on top. So that's gonna go on top. And then we have another one there. Where's our little springs? Here's two springs. We can put them just like this. And then this way, when we're doing the other caliper, we can put it on the other side. Now, normally I would do one side at a time, and then this way there's no confusion. But I'm gonna be painting these, so you'll see at the end of the video they're painted. So I wanna spray them all at the same time. So this is why I'm doing this, so I know this is for this side, and then the other ones will obviously be for the other side. And we know the inner pad is the one that gets the wear indicator, because you can see on the outside if it's getting thin, but you can't see on the inside really without taking off the wheel and everything like that. So that's why the inside pad usually gets the wear indicator. So what we're gonna do is we're just gonna take it apart. So sometimes these top and bottom pins are different. Sometimes you have a rubber thing on, sometimes you don't. So this one's just a straight steel pin. Let's see if this one's got a rubber thing on it. And this one does. So we know the rubber thingy goes at the top. Now you got to be careful not to put too much on inside the one that has a rubber, or else every time you push it in, it's going to want to push itself out because it almost hydro-locks. It makes a really good seal. So we just need a little bit in. We can see these ones were great. They weren't dry, so that's awesome. Sometimes they get really dry and they get really hard to take out. And as you can see in this clip that I put up in the corner of the screen there, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Sometimes they are just really, really hard to get apart, these pins. And there you can see me fighting with that one. That one's from a Lexus IS250, and it was just a pain. And, you know, thankfully this Acura, I didn't have the issues with this Acura, but you never know. If someone does your brake job and doesn't lube up the pins properly, well, that's what happens. They get really, really difficult to remove.
Okay, so let's take a look at the rotor. So here we have, you can see where the pad actually sat before. It's actually called imprinting. And what this can cause is a pulsating pedal. So you definitely don't want that.
Now we can see if we can pull it off, and there, it's loose, so that's great. A lot of times they're not. If they're not loose, there's 2 screw holes right there, and we can twist screws in just in there, and then as you twist them in, it pulls the rotor off. But this is good, it's actually coming off. Now because these are brake shoes, right here we don't really need to clean too much. We can do a little bit of a cleaning, but if ever you're going to use a wire wheel or anything, make sure you use brake clean or water or something just to get all the dust out. Whenever you take off a drum, and this can sort of be considered a drum, I know it's a rotor, but whenever you have shoes inside, it's the inner part is considered a drum. The amount of dust can be like 100 times higher. It's huge. I'm just going to rinse it off. And what this does is it just takes off all the dust.
Okay, so now for the exciting part. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to be prepping all the parts for paint. And yes, if you're wondering, I am wearing my mask, even though I'm outside, because I just don't want to be breathing in any brake dust. Just not healthy for our lungs, guys. So please wear a mask. Just always be careful when you're doing this kind of stuff. So lots of cleaning going on here. Let's get back to the caliper. You can see my tool doesn't fit that normally goes in, probably because this is a rear caliper and there's just not enough clearance. So in this case, I'm going to use a C-clamp. It'll work perfectly fine because the caliper's off the vehicle, so it's a lot easier to do. Then I'm going to put a plug in the back of the caliper right here, and that's going to protect from any debris going into the back of the caliper while I'm doing my cleaning.
Okay, so we got our bracket and our caliper back from the paint shop. That's the backyard. And it actually turned out really, really well. So that's great. So now we're just going to assemble them. Now for taking this apart now, we're going to huck these because these were the old ones. And if you remember, I said the whole reason I put them in was just to prevent any paint from going into there. And that's what we've done.
And the reason we don't want any paint there is because we're going to put this Moly brake lube there. And plus, we just don't want a buildup of paint there because paint actually takes up a little bit of space. So you just don't want that. And now with the pad clips in there, you can see I'm just popping them in there. The Moly lube, or you can use anti-seize if you have it. It's just going to protect protect the caliper bracket from rusting, because when it rusts, it's going to push out those clips. And then what happens is the pads get tight in there, and then they can drag and you can have premature wear. So it's just not a good thing. So now you can see I'm just installing the pads. And don't forget, on top we need these springs. So many people that do brake jobs, they always forget these springs. Now they can fly out, so you kind of got to hold them with your hand. And you'll see when I put it on right here, you'll see that the trick, I actually left one off right there. And the reason I didn't want it on is it's just too hard. It just keeps throwing the pads out. So we'll take care of that later when we put the actual caliper on top of the caliper bracket. But for now, let's get this caliper bracket back on. There are 2 bolts in the back. Remember, they are 17mm bolts. So let's put those bolts in and tighten them up.
Is just make sure our little springs are attached. So now that they won't skip out, what I can do is I can hold them together with one hand, put the spring in with the other. There we go. So both springs are in. And this one actually just jumped out. Let's see if we can push it back in. There we go, we can save the day. So it's in. So yeah, there's a lot of pressure on these to want to come out. So now what we can do is we can just slide our caliper over so it holds them, and there we go. There's a better angle here. So we got it on here so it's holding them so they don't pop out. So now we can move our pins. So now what we got to do is just push our pins in just so we can get our caliper in over our pins. Now we have our 2 caliper bolts. We're just going to put these in.
Now a good rule of thumb is to snug both bolts in by hand first and then torque them. This way you know you're not doing any cross threading. Now if we look at the back of the caliper, you can see there's the plug that I put in. So we're just going to take this plug out and you can see it's nice and clean behind there. So now what we can do is we can get 2 brand new copper washers, and we put one on each side of the brake hose there. And then we'll torque that down, and then hopefully we should not get any brake leaks. Now what we'll do once this is tightened down is I'll pull the cap off the caliper, and what I mean by that is just a bleeder cap. There you go, it's just a little rubber protected cap for dirt. We're going to loosen off the bleeder and we're going to wait for some brake fluid to come out, and that's called gravity bleeding. And there you go, you can see it happening right now. And once this happens, what that means is there should be no more air bubbles. But just in case there is, what we're going to do is we're going to tighten it back up, and then first we're going to step on the brake and you should see the pads go back in. Now let's see. There we go. You can see the pads going in, and now we'll do a final bleed.
Push down and hold. Take your foot off. Push down and hold. Take your foot off. Push down and hold.
And that is it, my friends. So hopefully you've enjoyed this one, got something out of it, and I hope to see you next week. Thanks, everyone.